Let me start that over because I was on mute. So, hey guys, welcome to CraterMania. I'm your host, the man they call Crater. And I'd like to welcome you all back to my 500 Movies in 2025 series. And for today, this will be movies number 284 through 288. And I'm getting closer and closer to that 300 mark, and even better, get closer to that 500 movie mark. So we're over halfway there, guys, with the goal of watching the 500 movies in 2025. Um, for today's episode, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite movie franchises of all time, and I'm talking about the original Planet of the Apes movie franchise that dated from 1968 to 1973. So, got a lot to talk about. There's 5 movies here we're going to be talking about today. So there's, like I said, there's a lot to talk about. So I'm just going to jump right into this. I'm not going to wait any longer, and let's talk about the original, the one that started it all. And that's Planet of the Apes from 1968. So there are films that you watch, and then there are films that watch you back. You know what I mean? Like they hold up a mirror, not to your face, but just to the very soul of your species. And they ask questions that you might not be prepared, to answer. For me, and for countless others, who first encountered this movie at a very formative age, um, Franklin J. Shafter's Planet of the Apes is just an absolute masterpiece. It is more than a science fiction adventure. It is a primal and philosophical social satire wrapped in one of the most brilliant high concept premises in cinematic history. Um, and to this day, over a century later, it remains a towering achievement. A film whose um, intelligence, and artistry and just that devastating power have not been diminished by time, but sharpened by it. And my first view was on television. I was very young, which was long after its initial theatrical run. I was expecting, a fun, perhaps slightly goofy adventure movie about talking monkeys. I wasn't sure like what to expect, but that was my first expectation when going into it. What I got was this kind of this gut punch that just kind of reverberated through my whole cinematic consciousness, at a very young age, and it's felt that way ever since. Just the film's genius really begins with its slow, kind of deliberate burn. And if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. Like the opening act, they're aboard the spaceship Icarus, and it's just this becomes like a master class in establishing theme and character. So we meet George Taylor, who is played with just a career-defining, cynicism by Charlton Heston. Absolutely phenomenal actor, one of the greatest ever in history. Um, this is not our typical hero. Taylor is, just a man that's so disgusted with humanity that he has volunteered for a one-way 2,000-year journey into the cosmos to find something better than man. So Charlton Heston's monologue about leaving his century behind, with its petty wars and these kind of squabbling ideologies, just it really sets the stage perfectly. Um, he's not a hero that we're meant to simply root for. He's a vessel for our own species, and our species is self-loathing. A man running from a problem that, and he will soon discover, is inescapable. So when the spaceship, the Icarus, crash lands, the director here is it, his direction really transforms the film into this kind of survival epic. And there's these desolate, alien landscapes of what is just actually uh, Lake Powell, Arizona, where they filmed this. And it just feels very otherworldly. You know, the cinematography captures that crushing scale of this new world. This, dwarfing the human survivors, and emphasizing their vulnerability. Um, and the score of this film by legendary Jerry Goldsmith is just it's not a collection of melodies, but a soundscape of that primal fear. It's percussive and avant-garde, using these kind of metallic textures, animal horns, and echoing drums to kind of create this constant sense of unease, that impending doom. To me, I think it's one of the most effective and unsettling scores that ever been composed for film. Just kind of it scrapes directly at the listener's nerves, uh, or at least for me it does. But then comes that moment that seals the whole film's legendary status, which is the hunt. And after discovering this tribe of the cute, uh, kind of primitive humans, Taylor and his crew, the Icarus, are just kind of suddenly set upon by these gorillas on horseback, armed with rifles and nets, and the scene is pure, choreographed terror. Um, the inversion is total and absolute. The apes are just these organized, technologically superior um, civilians, and that these humans are just kind of the terrified, scattering beasts. You but it's in this moment that the film's kind of central allegory clicks into place with this kind of horrifying clarity. We're watching not just a hunt, but this kind of cinematic representation of every historical atrocity where a dominant group has just dehumanized and brutalized. And by placing a human or Taylor in this situation, in that position of that the hunted animal, the film just kind of forces in this uncomfortable and profound empathy. Um, and I think what elevates Planet of the Apes from a great concept to a masterpiece is just the complexity and that humanity of the apes themselves. And thanks to John Chambers' groundbreaking, Oscar-winning makeup, the apes here are utterly believable as living, breathing beings. But the makeup is only half the story. The performances beneath them are what really gives the film its soul. You look at Maurice Evans as Dr. Zayas, magnificent. He's not a simple villain. As the minister of science and defender of the faith, he embodies that kind of dangerous intersection of dogma and power. And he's intelligent, formidable, just driven by this secret knowledge that makes him both tragic and terrifying. His debates with Taylor are not about good versus evil, but about two competing worlds, both rooted in their survival of these their respective species. Um, but contrasting Zayas are the chimpanzee scientists Cornelius and Zira, uh, two of my favorite characters in film history. They're played with these kind of unforgettable warmth, the intellectual Curiosity by Roddy McDowell and Tim Hunter. Um, so they represent the glimmer of hope in this kind of upside down world. Science, passion, and just that courage to question, these established truths in their society. And just the friendship that develops between them and Taylor is really the whole part of it. Vera's fascination and just her eventual affection for this strange human, and 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 Cornelius is kind of very cautious, but he's brave pursuit of kind of archaeological evidence that contradicts the ape doctrine. Really provides the narrative's kind of moral compass. But at its core, the film is just this blistering courtroom drama, disguised as a sci-fi adventure. Taylor's trial before the Ape Tribunal is a brilliant satire of the whole Scopes monkey trial, with the roles reversed. Here's the theory of evolution is heresy, and just the very idea that a human can possess intelligence is a threat to just nations of ape society. And I love in that scene when like the orangutans, including Dr. Zayas, at the courtroom table, and one of them's doing like got their hands over their ears, one over their mouth, and one over their eyes. So the whole see no evil, hear no evil, uh, speak no evil. So I thought that was really funny that they had that in there. I always loved that growing up. But the lines are in this movie are iconic and really filled with meaning. It's a madhouse. That Taylor's screaming, and not just at the ape, but just at the that sheer absurdity, of a world where logic is just inverted and truth is just suppressed in the name of comfort and stability. And then there is the ending to this film. It is, I think, without question, one of the greatest and most shocking, most thematically perfect endings in just the history of film. It's been parodied so many times and things. I mean, this thing, the ending is iconic. Just so after escaping with the help of Vera and Cornelius, Taylor rides off with his mute companion Nova, who I failed to mention earlier talking about the film. But so he rides off with Nova, and him and her, come along this desolate beach. And Taylor, he's been given his freedom, but Dr. Zayas leaves him with this chilling warning. Don't look for it, Taylor. And you may not like what you find. And so in the distance, as he rides out, along this landscape, this shape starts to emerge from the surface, and it's jagged, green, and it's hauntingly familiar. So Taylor, drops to his knees and pounds the sand, and says, "Damn you! You blew it up! Damn you all to hell!" So the camera starts to pull back to reveal the corroded, half-buried remains of the Statue of Liberty. So the shock here is absolute. That this alien planet was Earth all along. Uh, Taylor never escaped humanity. He only journeyed to its death, to its break. It and his final, agonizing screams, like I said earlier, "You maniacs, you blew it up! Damn you all to hell!" It's just, those are not just that's not just a cry, of a broken man. It this is really an indictment of our entire species, kind of primal roar from Taylor of grief and of anger at our capacity for self destruction. So the twist is not a gimmick; it is just the final devastating piece of the whole film's puzzle. It retroactively, reframes every scene, every debate, every satirical jab. The Apes didn't rise to power through their own might. They inherited a world that humanity foolishly destroyed. And Dr. Zayas was never just this, you villain. He was this guardian of a terrible secret. Trying to prevent his own people from repeating humanity's mistakes uh, that brought the apocalypse. Um, but Planet of the Apes, is a film that operates on every level. Thrilling adventure, it's a character study, it's a social satire, it's just this chilling cautionary tale. That it critiques racism and religious dogma and scientific suppression, and and above all, it critiques that nuclear age arrogance. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But decades later, in a world still grappling with tribalism, misinformation, and just that threat of our own technology, the this film really feels more relevant than ever. It's this dark, beautiful, and just unforgettable masterpiece. That proves that the best science fiction is never about the future. It's always profoundly about us as humans as a society. And this film was directed, like I said before, Franklin J. Schaffner. He was just this acclaimed director who was known for his epic scale and and focus on powerful and isolated protagonists battling these kind of immense this and Shafter, he began his career in television during what's called the golden age with numerous, live dramas, programs like Playhouse 90 and winning several Emmy Awards. Uh, and, this whole background really owned his ability to work with actors and build that kind of intense dramatic tension. So when he transitioned to film, he brought that whole dramatic sensibility to a much larger canvas. His major works are characterized by their grand scope and historical weight. And like if you look in Patton from 1970, I think it's perhaps one of his most celebrated films too. This it's this epic biopic of about General George S. Patton, and it won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director. It's just been known for its kinda monumental scale, and George C. Scott's performance is iconic. Um, and but the director here, like I said, Schaffner, his style was a perfect fit for Planet of the Apes. He treated this fantastic premise, uh, just with the serious of a historical epic, grounded in the sci-fi in this kind of palpable, gritty reality, so to speak. But his talent for filming on these vast locations, his focus on Taylor's solitary struggle against the entire ape civilization are just, I think hallmarks of his whole directorial approach. Um, but to talk a little bit about the legacy of Planet of the Apes, it's immense, and just kind of multifaceted, permanently altered the landscape of sci-fi movies and kind of seeping deep into that global pop culture. Um, so one of the things that really uh, makes this legacy of Planet of the Apes so huge is just, it legitimized that mainstream sci-fi. Before 1968, which you said 2001: Space Odyssey, which released the same year, um, science fiction was relegated to the realm of like B movies, um, and Planet of the Apes proved that the genre could be this vehicle for A-list talent, a major budget, serious philosophical inquiries, and just that potent social commentary that we all love. You know, it was a very critical and commercial blockbuster. You know, it demonstrated, to studios that audiences were hungry for intelligent, thought-provoking sci-fi movies. And to go back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier about the makeup effect, John Chambers' prosthetic makeup was revolutionary. It went beyond these simple masks, allowing the actor to um, emote, I guess you could say, if you, as far as Fortnite terms, or, So and they really delivered like this kind of nuanced performance, you know. The work, you know, from John Chambers really earned him this special honorary Academy Award, and it set a new standard for creature effects that just influenced everything from Star Wars to modern fantasy films like Lord of the Rings. Um, so thing about it was the first modern movie franchise. Now, while James Bond did already exist, Planet of the Apes arguably created that first interconnected, serialized cinematic universe. And it built on 4 direct sequels that we're gonna also be talking about today. And that really told this continuous, um, cycling story. Beneath the Planet of the Apes, Escape from Planet of the Apes, Conquest from Planet of the Apes, Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Like I said, we're gonna be talking about all of those. Um, you know, and after the movies, this was followed by a live action TV series in 1974, and then also an animated series in 1975. This model of building a multi-film narrative became the blueprint for countless franchises to follow. Uh, and Planet of the Apes had this very cultural saturation about it. The film had permeated popular culture to an extraordinary degree. So if you look at the iconic quotes, lines like "Get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape," it's just instantly recognizable to so many people these days, and it's been quoted and it's been parodied endlessly and other things. And then going back to the ending, we talked about the ending already, but the ending to this film is really one of the biggest parts of why this film is so popular. That reveal of the Statue of Liberty is one of the most famous and shocking twist endings in film history. And it's parodied and like even the Simpsons have paid homage to. If the Simpsons are parodying your film or your show or whatever it may be, then you've made it. If the Simpsons are doing it, and then this was also parodied in one of my favorite uh, '80s films of all time, Spaceballs, which we're now getting the sequel to that finally. That's going to be something else. But anyway, there's this, in Planet of the Apes, there's also this very enduring imagery about it. The image of apes on horseback just is really unique in its own way. It really sets the standard for what sci-fi could be with this type of imagery, and just you know, this was something. The Planet of the Apes original franchise, starting with this film, it was so popular and so iconic that it would encourage future filmmakers to want to bring the franchise back to a new generation. So if you look at the modern reboot trilogy of Planet of the Apes, the original film's legacy was powerful enough to fuel, this kind of critically and commercially successful reboot series, which began with Rise of the Planet of the Apes and 2011, and that was followed by Dawn, and then War, and then Kingdom. And this new series it's been praised for some performances and the capture technology and that deep character work with the ape protagonist Caesar, which is respectfully built upon the kind of social and philosophical themes of the original, and just proves the concept it has this timeless appeal. In conclusion, I guess Planet of the Apes from 1968 is far more than a vintage sci-fi artifact. It's a foundational text of just modern speculative cinema. It took a high concept premise and imbued it with staggering intellectual and emotional depth, just crafting this kind of timeless allegory about a prejudice and faith and science and humanity's terrifying capacity for self annihilation. Um, and just through masterful direction, a brilliant script, groundbreaking effects and unforgettable performances. It created a complete and believable world that served as a dark mirror to our own. Its legacy is not just in the franchise it spawned, but in the intelligent, daring, and just socially conscious sci-fi that it inspired. Uh, but the final haunting image of a fallen Lady Liberty is uh, just a warning that echoes loudly today as it did in 1968. Cementing the film's status not just as a classic, but as a vital and just eternal piece of cinematic art. Um, and I see we got some people in the chat here. So hey, Jason W, you said you're not coming in very clear. Do I sound okay right now? And somebody let me know in the chat if you can hear me good because like I know StreamYard has been having some issues here lately. I don't know if it's StreamYard or YouTube, but I know a lot of people's live streams have been kind of glitchy and buffering, and the sound might not sound as good. But if anybody can hear me right now, anybody that's watching, I see I got two people in there right now. Let me know if I sound okay. Do I need to work? Do I need to fix anything on my end? Just let me know. But I'll be watching the chat. But I'm gonna go ahead and move on. Um, and just go with what I got because if it comes out becoming a total disaster with this stream, I'll redo it in the future or something. But uh, anyway, moving on with the next film in this franchise, which is Beneath the Planet of the Apes from 1970. Any fan I think of Planet of the Apes saga, Beneath the Planet of the Apes really holds a special, kind of somewhat notorious place in our hearts. It's that difficult middle child, that punk rock album that followed that kind of universally acclaimed symphony. You know what I mean? Like the 1968 original is this flawless piece of sci-fi cinema with a perfect pace, intellectually profound, shocking allegory. But following it was an impossible task. So what did the filmmakers do? They didn't try to replicate it. Instead, they took the foundational themes of the original, which is humanity's self-destructive nature, the dangers of dogma, the that, and that kind of that cycle of nature and its violence, right, really cranked the volume to a know definite horror. So, but Beneath isn't a perfect film, but just its audacity, its uncompromising belief, that sheer psychedelic weirdness really makes it not just a worthy sequel, but just an essential and brilliant chapter in the Apes mythology. Um, and the film's first challenge is the absence of this iconic star, Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston, he was reluctant to return, from what I understand. And he agreed only to just a brief appearance in it, which there is, but like I said, it's very brief. So this forced, the introduction of a new protagonist, Brent, played by James Franciscus, I think is how you pronounce his last name. So on the surface, Brent is like kind of basically a Taylor ripoff. He's another astronaut, following the same trajectory, crashing on the same planet, um, finding himself just in that same nightmare. Um, and critics, often point to this as a kind of a lazy retread, but I think, from a fan's perspective, it's a brilliant, narrative device. It's this brilliant narrative device, and Brent Brent's journey through that kind of familiar territory, encountering Nova, witnessing the Ape Society, it really serves to to reinforce that horrifying reality of this world. It's not this singular anomaly that happened to one man. It's this this established terrifying status quo. Um, but where Brent's journey really elevates the saga is when it diverges from Taylor. He doesn't just rediscover Ape City; he uncovers its new frightening political dimension. So we're introduced to General Ursa, who is this a military, um, you know, general, one of the guerrillas of the Ape City, who preaches this kind of holy war against the unknown threat in the Forbidden Zone. So this expands, the ape world beyond the scientific and religious conflict between Cornelius and Zira and Dr. Zayas. And now there's this third, terrifying pillar to it all, which is fascism. And Ursus rallies uh, with their kind of xenophobic rhetoric and chants that the only good human is a dead human is just chilling, and just, it presents this commentary on mob mentality and that political manipulation of fear. And Dr. Zayas, who is the complex antagonist of the first film, he's swept up in this tide, reluctantly joined the crusade. And this adds this whole tragic layer to his character. He's cheaper, the secret of man's folly is now forced to participate in a new one. And the film's true genius, however, is unleashed Brent and Nova. They flee into the forbidden, and they descend into that subterranean ruins of what was once New York City. And here's where the film really transforms from a sci-fi adventure into this kind of hallucinatory, psychedelic horror show. And the imagery within it is just unforgettable. The decaying remnants of Grand Central Station and St. Patrick's Cathedral, now repurposed as places of worship. This is where we meet the film's most uh, audacious, right, creation. It's this cult of these telepathic radiation scarred human mutants. These are the descendants of the survivors of the nuclear holocaust, and they've been warped into these very grotesque psychic beings who who worship the instrument of the world's destruction. And it's an intact nuclear missile. It's called the Divine Bomb, the Alpha and Omega. And this is not the stuff, say studio mandated sequel. This is pure uncut late '60s counterculture anxiety, just filtered through a sci-fi lens. And the mutants, religious service where they chant to their god, the bomb, and it, just kinda peel off their human-like mask to reveal scarred, veiny, visions of themselves is really one of the most bizarre and unnerving sequences in sci-fi history, I they're a dark mirror to the apes, where the the apes created a religion, out of ignorance and, out of ignorance of their past. And the mutants have really created one out of the full, like, horrifying knowledge of it. And their psychic powers are protecting the illusions of fire and, bleeding crucifixes and monster figures. It really adds a layer of that kind of psychological terror that makes the apes, you know, physical threat seem almost quaint. And then there's the ending to this film, you know. While made while it may not be as iconic as the original ending, um, this ending is still infamous for its own reasons, and I feel like it's a perfect ending for this film. So as the guerrilla army, invades the mutants underground, and the cathedral, all these factions start to collide in this storm of violence. And Brent's killed, Nova's killed, Taylor, who had been held captive, is mortally wounded. In his final moments, bleeding out at the foot of the Doomsday device. He looks upon a world consumed by hate and hate. And with his dying breath, he damns them all to hell once again and brings his hand down on the activation panel. Screen turns white. The detached, godlike voiceover performances in one of the countless billions of galaxies uh, in the universe lies a medium-sized star, and one of its satellites, a green and insignificant planet, is now dead. And this is not a cliffhanger; it is a full stop. That's it. It is the most nihilistic, ballsy, uh, resonant ending of any major studio film of that era. It takes the warning of the first film that humanity's pride will be its downfall, and brings it to its most logical and devastating conclusion. So it causes that cycle of violence and hatred, and fanaticism. It's inescapable. Whether the finger on the trigger belongs to a man, an ape, or a mutant, doesn't matter. But this movie is just a cinematic gut punch from which you never really recover. It has one of the most abrupt and shocking endings, for a sequel in a franchise, and it really cemented, the Planet of the Apes series as something far more than that simple pulp entertainment. It was a saga willing to look into the abyss, and Beneath the Planet of the Apes is that film that's had to jump right in. And for that, I think it deserves not just respect, but reverence for sure. But the director of this, excuse me, one second. So the director of Beneath the Planet of the Apes was Ted Post. Ted Post was a prolific and highly respected director, primarily known for his extensive work in television and collaborations with Clint Eastwood, like his television work. So Ted Post was this veteran, of television's, like I said, golden age. Written hundreds of episodes for iconic shows like Gunsmoke, Twilight Zone, Rawhide. Uh, his TV background made him an efficient, reliable, and workmanlike director capable of delivering a solid product on a tight schedule and a budget, and which was a key requirement for Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Um, and if you look at his work with Clint Eastwood, he directed Clint Eastwood in one of his most famous early westerns, which was Hang 'Em High from 1968. and then later, in the second Dirty Harry film, Magnum Force. Um, so these films really, showcase his ability to handle that gritty action and that tough, morally ambiguous character. But his direction on Beneath the Planet of the Apes really reflects his background. It's less art house and atmospheric than Schaffner's work on the original, but it's brutally effective, and just action oriented and just very unflinching in its dark vision. Um, but the legacy of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, I think, is far more significant than its critical reputation might suggest. It had a profound and lasting impact on the franchise and on sequel making in general. Um, but it proved Beneath was a major box office success, earning more than 3 times its budget. And this success proved to 20th Century Fox that Planet of the Apes was not a one-off phenomenon, but kind of viable, expandable franchise. Um, but without the financial success of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the the three films that would follow, which Escape, Conquest, and Battle, would never been made. I mean, it paved the way for the series to become one of sci-fi's first and most successful multi-film sagas. And the apocalyptic ending is, I think, its most important legacy. By literally blowing up the planet. The filmmakers wrote themselves basically into a corner. Um, so this act of narrative destruction, however, forced an incredible act of narrative creation. So to continue the series, the writers had to introduce the concept of time travel, which became the central plot device for the next film, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, which is up there as one of my favorite Planet of the Apes. This whole radical shift in direction from dystopian future to contemporary satire is a direct result of just that uncompromising finality of Beneath. And while the original film was a cautionary tale, Beneath was Beneath was a statement of damnation. It injected a heavy dose of Vietnam era cynicism and Cold War dread directly into a mainstream blockbuster. It's themes of like with the gorillas and kind of like trying to take over the society, and like you look at the religious fanaticism from the mutants, and just that inevitability of nuclear holocaust were just incredibly dark for a major studio sequel. It established the Apes franchise as a vehicle for bleak, complex social and political commentary. And this film added iconic and popularity elements to pop culture. The face killing mutants, the chant to the divine bomb, the image of a guerrilla army on the march became these kind of enduring symbols of the series' unique brand of that sci-fi surrealism. And these bizarre elements really help define the saga's identity as something far weirder and more daring than its contemporaries. But I guess in conclusion, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, uh, as much as I build it up and everything, it's ironically my least favorite in the original franchise. Um, and I'm not saying it's a bad movie by any means, because this is a fantastic, brilliant movie. But you'll come to learn that all of these films in the original franchise are brilliant to me, and so I just the other ones I just find parts of them that I enjoy a lot more than I do the story with this film. But Beneath the Planet of Apes, besides it being my least favorite, I think it's far more than that strange, you know, lesser sequel to a cinematic classic, the original. Um, it is a work of audacious, stylistic, and surprisingly profound filmmaking. While it may lack that polish, that perfect protagonist, of the original, it compensates with that raw thematic power, expanding the world of the apes to a richer and more terrifying place. And its legacy here is just undeniable. It ensured the survival of the franchise, forced these creative leaps that define the rest of the series, as we'll find out here shortly, and it just cemented, the Planet of the Apes saga as one of science fiction's most daring and philosophical explorations of humanity's darkest evil. You know, it's it's an essential, unforgettable, and just gloriously bleak masterpiece. Highly recommend it. Just as much as I recommend the original. Actually, if you want to watch the movie, you've never seen the Planet of the Apes before, just watch all of them. One, you're done with one of them, move on to the next. I mean, like I said, this franchise is one of my favorites of all time. And this next film that I'm going to be talking about in the franchise is one of the biggest reasons why this franchise is one of my all-time favorites. So, for any fan of Planet of the Apes Saga, the moment that the credits roll on Beneath the Planet of the Apes, it's this moment of pure shock, like I talked about. And the world is gone. It's blown to smithereens by this doomsday bomb. And it just, that itself, like I said, was this audacious and nihilistic ending that seemingly slammed the door shut on the franchise forever. But then, just 1 year later, here comes Escape from the Planet of the Apes, a film that did the impossible. It not only resurrects the series from literal oblivion, but did so with such intelligence and heart, and just daring that many of us fans consider it the secret weapon of the original franchise. Which is that it's that thoughtful, tragic heart of the entire saga. So where the first film was, this sci-fi adventure mystery, and second was kind of this bleak horror allegory. Uh, Escape from Planet of the Apes really pulls off this masterstroke of creative reinvention. It flips the entire premise on its head. This isn't about humans discovering a planet of apes. It's about apes discovering a planet of humans, which is our planet. So what happens here? The film opens with this revelation that our beloved chimpanzee couple Cornelius and Zira, along with this the brilliant friend Dr. Milo, managed to salvage and pilot Taylor's sunken ship, getting caught in the shockwave of Earth's destruction and thrown back through time. So what follows is for the first half of the film, this kind of very disarmingly charming and very witty social satire. The sight of these three apes, astronaut gear, splashing down off the coast of 1973 Los Angeles is played for a perfect mix of bewilderment and just humor. And the film, wisely takes its time, first treating them as curiosities, then as celebrities. And Zira, ever the extrovert here, embraces this culture. She go and I love one of my favorite things in the film is the shopping spree that Zira goes on, and forces Cornelius to go with her and picks out some of the clothes, including the suit and everything. Um, and just these candid moments that they have with human society, and even like the scene where she's uh, drinking the grape juice, but it's something alcoholic, and she gets all tipsy, and she goes into this confession about where they came from and what their ideologies are all about and all that. It's just all of it's pure gold in my opinion. Kim Hunter's performance as Zira is just fantastic. He imbues Zira with that warmth and intelligence and that kind of vibrant personality that you forget you are watching an actress in an ape mask for a minute. And Roddy McDowell as Cornelius is just that perfect counterpart to her. He's, Cornelius is more reserved, more cautious, haunted by the knowledge of the future. So Cornelius's discomfort with humans really provides quiet, uh, constant tension beneath the surface level comedy that was in this film. Um, but this is a Planet of the Apes film, and tragedy is woven into its DNA, as with all of the Planet of the Apes films. The film's genius lies in its slow and deliberate, pivot um, from lighthearted comedy to a dark, paranoid thriller. So the second half of this movie is very different from the first half. The catalyst for the second half of the film is the president's science advisor, Dr. Otto Hasler, uh, which is he represents that cold, logical fear of the unknown. And once Cornelius reveals the future, how apes will rise and man will fall, that these celebrity apes now become a threat. And the questions that the Hasline poses are terrifyingly logical. If you knew someone would one day give birth to the man who would cause the plague, that destroys your world. Would you stop it? You know, so this kind of descent into darkness is really what elevates Escape from a clever sequel into a profound tragedy. So our sympathies are entirely with Cornelius and Zero. We've seen their humanity, their love for each other, and their innocence in this timeline. So when they're hunted, we feel that terror with them. And the final act, I think, is one of the most heartbreaking final acts in 1970 cinema. Um, I mean, it's it absolutely breaks my heart every time I get to the ending of this film. Um, so in their desperate flight, the kindness of the circus owner Armando, and their ultimate, horrific end on this desolate tanker ship are emotionally devastating. As a fan watching these two characters who anchored this series from the beginning, with their compassion and intellect, only to be gunned down by by these humans back in the 1970s is just this really unforgettable gut punch. It's a brave, merciless ending that stands as this stark commentary on prejudice and humanity's capacity for cruelty when faced with fear. Um, this film was directed by Don Taylor. Unlike Franklin J. Schaffner, who directed the original, um, Don Taylor was more of a reliable and efficient studio director who was known for his ability to handle kind of diverse genres with competence and skill. Um, he began his career as an actor, before moving into directing for television and film. Um, but he was not a filmmaker with this singular recognizable style, but just with this highly capable craft. Um, his direction in Escape from Planet of the Apes is just perfectly suited to the material. He skillfully manages the film's challenging tonal shift, handling the light, satirical comedy of the first half, just effectively as that grim, suspenseful tone of the second. Um, you know, his other notable directorial works include the horror sequel Damien, The Omen 2 from 1978. He did The Final Countdown in 1980. And then he also did the 1977 adaptation of the Island with Dr. Morale. So his work on Escape from Planet of the Apes often considered just finest, though, as he successfully balanced character, satire, and tragedy on this relatively modest budget. Um, the legacy and the impact of Escape from Planet of the Apes is immense, just like any other Planet of the Apes, both the franchise and in sci-fi storytelling. This film really saved the franchise, like I said earlier. And I think that's one of its most immediate impacts was that because the franchise had written itself into a corner. You know, and by introducing time travel, um, screenwriter here, Paul Dane, um, he just created this kind of loophole, or this kind of predestination paradox. That this kind of narrative device was a brilliant soft reboot almost that allowed the saga to explore its own origins. And this film cemented the series' core philosophical theme, which is that fate is inescapable. The apes attempt to escape their doomed future is the main like Cornelius's testimony plants the seeds of fear in humanity. So basically, if Cornelius and Zira had never gotten on that ship and were not back in time, then the future that Charlton Heston as Taylor discovered in the original film would have never existed. So, like the persecution of Cornelius and Zira, and and just the the murder of them really ensures their son Caesar will be raised with a deep understanding of human cruelty, directly leading him to eventually spark that revolution that his father described. And it's just a tragic, self fulfilling prophecy that gives the entire saga this very powerful quality about it. And this this is the first film where the apes are the undisputed protagonist. So it was always kind of like questionable in the first two films. We were mainly seeing like Taylor in the first film, Brent in the second film as our protagonist. Um, but just that love for those characters, Cornelius and Zira, when going into the third film, and showing them as our main protagonist. We're the audience is forced to see the world and its prejudices through their eyes, and this kind of shift was critical for the following films as well, Conquest and Battle, which center completely on the ape perspective. And this is the film where we have the birth of Caesar. And I think that's one of the most important legacy with this film is that introduction of Caesar. This character, born Milo, is linchpin the entire Planet of the Apes mythology. He is the alpha of the ape revolution in Conquest. The Moses-like figure in battle, and the direct inspiration, just for the protagonist of the critically acclaimed modern reboot trilogy that I spoke of earlier, which lasted from 2011 to 2017. Um, but Escape is the foundational origin story for the saga's most significant character. Um, and in conclusion, though, Escape from the Planet of the Apes is far more than a simple bridge scene. It's a bold, emotionally complex film that dares to blend cutting satire with heartbreaking tragedy. It stands as a testament to the power of character-driven storytelling, anchored by those unforgettable performances from Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter. And while it may lack that kind of epic scale of the first film, or the raw fury of Conquest we'll talk about here in a minute, Escape is arguably the most poignant and intelligently constructed entry in the original series. It is the story of love and prejudice and just that cruel irony of fate. And I think it remains as central and gut wrenching and just a brilliant piece of sci-fi cinema. It's definitely up there, you know, as one of my top favorites. Um, and I don't normally do this, but I will rank these movies for you after I'm done talking about all of them. So I'll let you know what in out of all five of them, what is my favorite to my least favorite. So, or I'll go least favorite to favorite. How about we do that? Okay. So the next film, this next film is my absolute favorite film in the entire series. So there's a spoiler already for you guys. So when I do the ranking, you'll already know which one is my main favorite. It's this next film with Conquest of the Planet of the Apes from 1972, and just really just as a lifelong fan at this point of Planet of the Apes, I've often found myself in debates about which film really truly defines the series. You know, a lot of people will point to the iconic and twist imperfection of the 1968 original. And there's other fans out there that will modern sensibilities and the emotional depth of the Andy Serkis reboot. But for me, uh, just the raw and seriously political heart of the entire franchise, and always will be, in my opinion, 1972's Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. It is definitely the darkest and most daring and most ideolo- ideologically, I can't say that word sometimes, but it's the most potent entry in the series, is what I'm trying to say. It's a film that trades that sci-fi wonder for the grit of urban revolution and really stands as this piece of just social commentary that feels more relevant today than ever. And we'll get into that. But let's set the stage here. So the first film was, philosophical mystery. Beneath, descended into that nihilistic apocalyptic horror. Escape was a clever, tragic, fish out of water story that brought timeline, full circle. Conquest is where the series cashes, check that Escape wrote. It shows us how the world of Taylor and Dr. Zayas came to be, and the answer is not, a general evolution. It's born of fire and hatred and bloodshed. And the premise here is feelingly plausible, within the series' logic. A plague from space has wiped out all cats and dogs, leading humanity to adopt these apes as household pets. But what begins as a novelty quickly sours into exploitation. The apes, being intelligent and capable of learning these complex tasks, are turned into a silent, subservient slave class. They're all dressed in color-coded jumpsuits, trained with just electric shock rods, these searing hot lights, and just forced to perform every task that their human masters ask them to, and into this near future dystopia, which was setting is in like a futuristic 1991. Um, Arrives Caesar. Again, now Roddy McDowell playing the role of Caesar, who previously played Cornelius, but now he's taken the role of his grown up son Caesar. And he's Caesar at this time. He's an orphan basically. Because his parents, Cornelius and Zira, were killed at the end of the last film. And now Caesar has been hidden, for 20 years by this kind circus owner Armando, and Caesar has a secret. Unlike the other apes, he can think and reason, and most dangerously of all, he can speak. So from the moment that Caesar and Armando, enter the city, the film's kind of oppressive atmosphere it becomes suffocating. Director J. Lee Thompson leveraging that cold, you know, brutalist like architecture of that recently built Century City in Los Angeles, you know, creates this kind of concrete jungle that feels less like a gleaming future and more like a high tech prison. And the visuals are very stark and unforgettable here. The sea of apes and green and orange jumpsuits, the black cladded riot police, the sterile white interrogation of ape management. This isn't the dusty like alien landscape of the original. This is our world twisted into a kind of a fascist nightmare. So something to think about if you know where I'm going with this. But what makes Conquest so powerful is um, is the performance, of Roddy McDowell. And having played the gentle, intellectual Cornelius in the previous films, he returns here as Cornelius' son, and just that transformation is staggering. For the first half of the film, Caesar has to remain silent, and so Roddy McDowell conveys this kind of universe of rage, sorrow, and of defiance, all through his eyes alone. Um, and it's for the, the reason that Roddy McDowell is one of my all-time favorite actors. I think he's one of the greatest actors who lived, and he really, made me realize that after I grew up watching these films. Um, but and just something about his eyes, he's always been able to tell a story with his eyes, no matter what role it is. Whether it be the Planet of the Apes films, whether it be Fright Night, or it be Classic 1984, whether it be his bookworm on the Batman 1966 TV series. We see the pain in this film, especially. We see the pain as witnesses his kind being abused. We feel his terror, when he is separated from Armando. We witness his soul crushing induction into slavery, where he is beaten and humiliated and auctioned off like property. And when he finally cries out, in anguish and fury, "Lousy human bastard!" It's not just a plot point; it's the breaking of this dam that's been built. this is where the film will the proverbial dam has been built. But this is where the film ignites. Caesar, now a slave in the service of the ruthless governor Brick, begins to secretly organize this rebellion. You know, he's not that benevolent leader we see in the later reboot. At least not yet. This Caesar is a revolutionary, you know, forged in kind of a crucible of oppression. He's a tactician, an organizer, just a figure of this righteous fury. The film's centerpiece is the Ape Uprising, which is just a sequence of shock and violence and raw power, and that's pretty much that's what ends the film. It's just one of those other, you know, common shocking things that was to be expected with the Planet of the Apes franchise. So, it's not this, and like I said, that whole uprising from the apes, it's not this glorious, stylized battle or anything. It's just chaotic, brutal riot. These apes are armed with knives, torches, whatever the fuck that they can find, just turn the influence of their oppression back on their master. It's deeply uncomfortable to watch some parts, as it should be, though. I think that's the whole point. The film forces us to question who the real beasts are, amongst humans and apes. Uh, but the film's original ending, uh, which was thankfully restored for modern home video release, is one of the most uncompromising cinematic hits. The city is just burning all around him. Caesar, he delivers this monologue with vengeful fury, and this is one of the biggest reasons why this film is my favorite. Is this end monologue? He declares that the roles will be reversed. The apes will now be the masters, and humans the slaves, and that their reign of terror will be absolute. And that's just kind of summing it up vaguely. I mean, it's this big long speech that he gives, and it's just absolutely amazing. And just given just with such a performance, it's just like it blows my mind from what it's now. And but all this culminates in the eight beating Governor Breck to death. It's a terrifying moment. A complete version of that compassionate eight that we thought we knew. The studio was terrified by the rescreen we had. They forced this last minute change to add the line from Caesar's love interest Lisa and a voiceover from Caesar that softens his stance, offering a kind of glimmer of hope and mercy. And while that may have been impactful and great for when on its initial release, I think I think with the legacy of this film is built so much larger with that original ending. That, like I said, thankfully was brought back to us when these movies was released on several modern home video releases. Because I just feel like it creates a bigger impact leading into the next film that we'll talk about here shortly. But anyway, while the theatrical version is still a great film, I think that the original cut is a masterpiece of that bleak revolutionary art. It argues that violence begets violence, and that hatred, you know, unleashed, consumes everything in its path. Of course, Conquest is not without its flaws, though. The budget was significantly lower than its predecessors, and it kind of shows here. But the number of apes in Final Battle is smaller than the script implies, and many sets and props kind of feel recycled. But these limitations, in a strange way, kind of adds to it, documentary style realism, in my opinion. This doesn't feel like a polished Hollywood epic. It feels like newsreel footage, from just the end of the world or something, you know what I mean? Um, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes is that fulcrum upon which the entire saga rests. It is the essential, brutal link that explains everything that came before and everything that will come after. It's a film that had the courage to look at that social unrest of its time, the race riots, protests, the fear of violent uprising, channel it directly into its narrative. It's angry, it's intelligent, it's profoundly unsettling, and it's not just a great apes film. It's just that monumental piece of political science fiction, and it's very punk rock, I gotta say. But the director of this movie, like I said, was J. Lee Thompson. He was a British film director who's known for his intense and often kind of large scale action and skits. I think some of his most famous work. Uh, he did the 1961 World War II movie called the Guns of Navarone, which starred Gregory Peck and David Niven. Um, that film was a massive international success and just earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Director. Um, but he's also known for his 1962 psychological thriller Cape Fear, which also starred Gregory Peck, and that film had Robert Mitchum. Um, and he's known for other films, but like those are the two like that I know the best from him aside from Conquest. In his later career, in the '80s, he became closely associated with Charles Bronson, for whom he directed 9 films, including several entries in the Death Wish series, including Death Wish 4. But just his expertise in kind of marshaling, that taut action sequences, building suspense was perfectly suited for Conquest of Planet of the Apes. He brought a very gritty, street level intensity to the film's revolutionary violence, making it feel visceral um, and immediate rather than like a stylized sci-fi fantasy. And the legacy and the impact of this film uh, is very immense, like any other Planet of the Apes film, both within the franchise and just that broader context of sci-fi cinema. More than any other film in the original series, Conquest is a direct and just unflinching allegory for contemporary social issues, specifically the American Civil Rights and just racial oppression. The imagery here is undeniable. The subjugated class identified by their appearance as apes in color-coded jumpsuits. They're being brutalized by police and riot gear, and ultimately rising up in this violent urban rebellion. Um, so the film directly mirrors that imagery of the race riots of the late 1960s, and those revolutionary groups like the Black Panther Party. The character of McDonald, which is this lone African American in this position of power, he sympathizes with the apes. He explicitly states the parallel, noting that his own ancestors were once slaves. So this made the film incredibly controversial upon its release, but I think it's really cemented its status as a very daring and potent piece of political filmmaking. Um, the film introduces and defines the character of Caesar here, who becomes really the most important character in the entire Ape mythology. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the Ape who begins the revolution that will eventually lead to the world seen in the first film. He's presented as a complex figure, a Moses-like leader for his people, but also, a figure capable of this immense hatred and vengeance. So this complexity I think, is his most enduring legacy. Um, but the film, Conquest is just that primary source material for the modern reboot that we talked about earlier, particularly Rise of the Planet of the Apes. So Rise of the Planet of the Apes is essentially is high budget, um, modern reimagining of Conquest's core story, which is a uniquely intelligent ape named Caesar, raised by a benevolent human, witnesses the cruelty inflicted upon his kind and just leads them into rebellion against their oppressors. And while that anti-circus version of Caesar is ultimately more compassionate, his entire arc is born from that template that was created by Roddy McDowall with Caesar in Conquest. So the reboot really owe their entire narrative and that thematic foundation to this film from 1972. Well, this was just this film was a huge shift in sci-fi tone. Along with films like Soylent Green and A Clockwork Orange, Conquest was part of this wave of that early 1970s, dystopian sci-fi that was grim and violent, but deeply skeptical of authority and human nature. It really helped solidify sci-fi as a genre capable of tackling these very serious, immediate political themes in a mature and often disturbing manner. Uh, but I guess in conclusion, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes is far more than just the fourth installment in a sci-fi series. It is the franchise's ideological core, a brutal, uncompromising, and brilliantly executed examination of of oppression and revolution and that that cycle of nature and violence. Just really, it is anchored by this phenomenal performance from Roddy McDowall and Daley Thompson's just intense direction. The film transcends its budgetary limitations to become this timeless political allegory. Um, so its legacy is cemented not only by its profound influence on the blockbuster reboot trilogy, but by its enduring, uncomfortable relevance in a world still grappling with the very same issues of power and prejudice and rebellion. It's so fearlessly depicted. It's not an easy film to watch, I will say that, but it is definitely an essential. It's a masterpiece of just political sci-fi, that, and to me, it's the crown jewel of the Planet of the Apes. Uh, so it's absolutely my favorite of the franchise. So that's something you guys will know ahead of time when I do the ranking at the end of this video. But let's go ahead and move on to the last film in the original franchise, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, 1973. And for decades, Battle for the Planet of the Apes has been looked at by a lot of fans as a designated black sheep of the original franchise. Uh, for me, that would be beneath, but we'll get into that. But anyway, this film was dismissed for its hugely budget, criticized for its seemingly simplistic plot, and overshadowed by four other films in the franchise. It's a film that even some devoted fans can forgive. But I am not one of those people. To me, uh, Battle is not the weakest link, but one of the most necessary ones. It's the franchise's conscience. You if Escape from the Planet of the Apes is the franchise's heart, Battle for the Planet of the Apes is conscious. A very flawed, profound meditation on that cycle of nature and violence, and just that agonizing difficulty of just building a better world. So where the other films chronicle, the fall of man and the rise of the ape, Battle dares to ask the most important question of all: now what? You know, and so this film was released in 1973, and the film picks up after the fiery apocalypse of Conquest of Canada. Caesar, who is this revolutionary leader, played with just with another magnificent performance from the legendary Ryan McDowell. It's Caesar's no longer a warrior, but now a lawmaker. He presides over this fledgling society, this rustic village where apes and their former human masters attempt a very fragile coexistence. And this premise alone is another radical shift in the series, because the series is known for its kind of dystopian horror and shocking twists suddenly becomes this political and philosophical drama. The the central conflict isn't about survival against a powerful oppressor. It's about the internal struggle to define the soul of a new civilization. And I think this is where the film's genius truly lies. It's embodied in that kind of, I don't know, where Caesar, it's really embodies everything within his character, with this film. So, and we'll get more into that, but you have the British guerrilla general in this, General Aldo, and you have this wise orangutan, Virgil, who's played by Paul Williams, and I love Virgil in this film. So, but this isn't just a simple good people dynamic. Caesar is the law, that idealist preferred by the knowledge of humanity's self-destruction. He's desperate to steer his people away from that same fate. Um, his whole motto, "Ape shall not kill ape." It's not just a motto. It's not just a rule either. It's that cornerstone of his entire vision for the future. And Roddy McDowell's performance, again, like I said, is a masterclass in weary leadership. You see the weight of his parents' legacy, the horrors that he witnessed in Conquest, and just that crushing responsibility of being this Messiah-like figure in every line on his face. He is not the triumphant Caesar of the Revolution. He is the tired, anxious Caesar of the morning after. Like I said, opposing him is, although his character is often written off as a one-dimensional villain, but Aldo is essential. He represents a primal nature, strength, aggression, prejudice that humanity cultivated in them for centuries. And so he is the voice of the ape supremacy, echoing the same kind of hateful retort that the humans use against them. Um, he believes humans are cattle, and that strength is the only law that matters. Aldo is that embodiment of the easy path, the path of hatred, and revenge, and dominance. He's that nagging fear in the back of Caesar's mind. The fear that apes are no better than the men who created and enslaved them. And caught between these two is Virgil. Virgil is the philosopher and scientist of this village. He's basically the new Dr. Zaius. But where Dr. Zaius used knowledge to enforce dogma and hide truth, Virgil used it to seek wisdom and promote understanding. So his conversations with Caesar are really the film's intellectual heart here. Um, when Caesar travels to, those radiated ruins of the Red City to seek guidance from video logs of parents, it's Virgil who tempers his quest with caution. He understands that looking to the past to be as dangerous as it is light. Um, and the battle of the idol uh, is in many ways kind of a red herring. Um, the physical confrontation with Scarred led by this bitter Governor Colt is film's really most criticized element. Uh, yeah, the budget limitations are painfully obvious here. The fight is this dusty, small scale skirmish, not really an epic war. But to focus on spectacle is, I really think, is to miss the point entirely. The true battle is the one raging inside the Ape City. It's the battle between Caesar's law and Aldo's ambition. Between forgiveness and vengeance, between civilization and savagery. The external threat from Colt's forces serves only to accelerate this internal crisis, forcing the apes to decide what kind of society they will be tested. Uh, but when Aldo murders Caesar's son, Cornelius, and breaks the whole sacred law, the film reaches its devastating climax. Caesar's subsequent confrontation with Aldo is not an action hero showdown. It's a tragedy. Killing Aldo, Caesar is forced to break his own principle to save it. It's a gut-wrenching paradox, basically. To preserve the soul of his nation, he must commit its greatest sin. And it's in this moment that Caesar uh, truly understands, the burden of leadership and the just that corrupting influence of power, even when wielded, for these righteous reasons. Um, and the film's final scene is really its most brilliant, and misunderstood stroke of genius. Centuries later, the great lawgiver, recounts Caesar's story to a mixed group of ape and human children. So, and he preaches the history of peaceful coexistence. But, but as he finishes, the camera closes in on the statue of Caesar, and a single tear rolls down the cheek of the stone statue. Um, is it a tear of joy, celebrating a peace, finally realized, or is it a tear of sorrow, mourning a dream that ultimately failed, proving that the cycle of violence never truly broken? So the film refuses to answer that, leaving us kind of with this very ambiguous and haunting found. Yet it suggests that peace is not a destination, but a constant and vigilant struggle, a battle that is just never truly over. Um, Battle for the Planet of the Apes is a film of ideas, not fiction. It chose to end a saga of action and with this quiet, somber, and deeply philosophical fable. Um, it's a film that had the courage to be introspective with when audiences expected explosions. For that, I think it deserves not our scorn, but our deepest respect. It's the thoughtful, melancholic, and essential capstone to one of cinema's greatest sci-fi sagas. Um, and the director for this, like I said, was J. Lee Thompson, um, same from the last film, and just what an outstanding film this is that he directed. I mean, so he did Conquest, which is my favorite of the series, and while this one is not in my top three, there's another here for when I do the ranking here shortly. Um, this film is definitely, very impactful and is a huge important part of the legacy of the Planet of the Apes franchise. Um, so like I said, J. Lee Thompson, directed both of the final two Apes films, and just really bringing this kind of gritty, efficient style, It was suited to the dwindling budgets, the action-oriented plots. Um, but talking about the legacy of Battle for Planet 8, it's very complex. Evolve being considered the franchise's you know least love to being recognized as that conceptual blueprint for the celebrated modern trilogy. Um, its primary role was to provide closure to the original five-film cycle. It brought the story full circle, inverting the premise of the first film. Instead of a human landing in a world uh, dominated by apes, Battle shows the very beginning of that ape-dominated and the philosophical struggles inherent in its creation. It directly addresses the themes of prejudice and violence and that that cycle of nature and of history that just kind of ran through the entire series. Upon release, Battle was the lowest grossing film of the franchise at that point, and was met with largely negative reviews. Critics and audiences, accustomed to that grand scale and shocking twist of the earlier films, were disappointed, by its low budget, less than epic final battle, and more talkative, philosophical. For many years, its legacy was that of cheap and unsatisfying conclusion. But again, I highly disagree with all of that. I think this was perfect. I love ambiguous endings and just how they ended this entire franchise or the original series on that ambiguous ending with the tear falling down, statue of Caesar. It's just neat because I love that it allows you to kind of come up with your own thought process, your own meaning behind it. But anyway, the film's I think most significant enduring impact is as I've said that profound influence on the 21st century reboot series starring Andy Serkis. Battle laid the thematic and narrative groundwork that the new films would expand upon with modern technology, more sophisticated storytelling. Uh, and you have Robert Dow Caesar, who was a reluctant leader trying to balance peace with the necessity of war, and is basically that direct ancestor of Andy Serkis' Caesar. Both characters are defined by their struggle to build a civilization while being haunted by the violence of the past and threatened by forces from within and without. And the whole central law in this the ape shall not kill ape, it's it's introduced here, and it really becomes that core moral conflict of the modern trilogy. Most notably in Dawn of Planet of the Apes, uh, Koba's betrayal and murder of other apes is a direct echo of Aldo's transgression, forcing Caesar to confront that same impossible moral dilemma. And just that the ideological war between Caesar's diplomacy and Aldo's militarism is mirrored perfectly in that conflict between Caesar and Koba in the modern film. So both Aldo and Koba represent the dark and vengeful potential of the ape, arguing that hatred of humans is the only path to survival. And this internal strife is kind of the central engine of that whole modern series. Um, but in essence, the entire narrative arc of the modern trilogy, which is visionary ape leaders attempt to found a peaceful society, only be undermined by a hateful ape that's rival and a hostile human threat, that was all first established in Battle for the Planet of the Apes. But I guess in conclusion here, Battle for the Planet of the Apes may be hampered by the financial constraints of its time. Its thematic ambition, I think, is undeniable, though. It courageously concludes the legendary saga, not with a bang, but with a question about our very nature. Its legacy has been rightfully reevaluated, as it is now clear that this humble, often maligned film provided the rich philosophical soil from which the acclaimed modern Ape trilogy grow. So it's a vital, thoughtful, and ultimately indispensable chapter in the Planet of the Apes universe. Um, and honestly, I just think the ending to this original franchise is perfect. Um, and it's just for everything that I've said about this film. I mean, it's I've tried to let you guys see why I love this franchise so much and why I consider it as one of my all-time favorite franchises. It's definitely up there. It's definitely in the top three of my favorite franchises of all time. If not, it may possibly be my favorite. It's something I really need to sit down and think about, reevaluate, but definitely I know this one is absolutely up there. Um, but I guess I'll do the ranking now for these. So, coming in at number 5, the Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Number 4, A Battle for the Planet of the Apes. Number 3 would be Escape from the Planet of the Apes. Number 2 would be the original film. And number 1, Conquest for the Planet of the Apes. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this live stream, this video of me talking about Planet of the Apes franchise. I have been wanting to do this for a while now, so I finally just found a good place scheduled in there where I didn't really have any kind of theme stuff going on. So really glad I share, my thoughts, my opinions on this franchise with you guys finally. I want to thank everyone that was here watching live, whether you were just watching or if you're in the chat. I really appreciate you guys being here. If you're watching this on replay, I want to thank you guys just as much for just taking the time to check this video out and hear me kind of just fanboy over these movies. Um, but if you're a fan of the Planet of the Apes films, let me know in the comments below what your favorite Planet of the Apes film is and why is that your favorite. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button for more videos like this one. And as always, click that bell for any future notifications for videos here on the channel. But I guess with all that said, guys, I'm getting ready to go watch SummerSlam Night 1. You can catch me tomorrow night on over here, either here on the channel or over on the Dead Pit channel, where simultaneously we'll be broadcasting that stream, talking about the recap for SummerSlam Night 1 and Night 2. So we're just going to watch Night 1 tonight, then we're going to watch Night 2 tomorrow night, and then after Night 2, that's when we'll be doing the stream. And so you can hear us talk about that stuff if you're a wrestling fan. Um, but yeah, until then, with all that said, I'm Crater. This is CraterMania. I love you guys. Have a good night.